In a powerful and emotional disclosure, Donnie Swaggart has broken his silence about the final moments of his father, legendary evangelist Jimmy Swaggart, during his time in the ICU. With raw honesty and deep reverence, Donnie shares a heartfelt confession that paints a vivid picture of love, faith, and farewell. As he opens up about those sacred last hours, his words resonate with millions who have followed the Swaggart family's spiritual journey, offering both comfort and a profound sense of closure during a time of immense sorrow. A son's vigil, walking through the valley of shadows. It was just past midnight when Gabriel Swaggart's phone rang, its sharp tone slicing through the heavy silence of the house like a blade. The room was cloaked in darkness, but not just the kind that comes with night, it was the kind of darkness that feels almost spiritual, as though the world itself was holding its breath. A low hum of unease had settled over the stillness, a kind of invisible pressure that warned something was terribly wrong. As Gabriel sat up, heart already racing, he sensed that life as he knew it was about to shift. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the phone. On the other end, a family friend's voice quivered with urgency and fear. "Gabriel, your dad," he collapsed. "The ambulance is on its way." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. For a few moments, he couldn't move. His brain tried to process the unimaginable. Jimmy Swaggart, his father, his spiritual mentor, the firebrand preacher whose voice had filled packed auditoriums and reached across airwaves for decades, was in peril. Adrenaline kicked in. He sprang from his bed, dressing hastily with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Lord, not yet," he whispered as he grabbed his car keys. "Please, not like this." Every breath was a prayer, every second a race against time. As he sped through the empty Baton Rouge streets, the city lights blurred into streaks, meaningless and surreal. His mind reeled back to just a few hours earlier, his father seated comfortably in his favorite chair, flipping through his beloved Bible, making notes for another Sunday sermon. He had looked strong. He had sounded vibrant. Nothing had seemed out of place. And now there were sirens and hospital halls and the fear of finality. When Gabriel arrived at the hospital, the scene had already shifted into the quiet chaos of medical emergency. A doctor met him with carefully measured words and a solemn expression. "Your father has suffered a major cardiac episode. He's being moved into the ICU. We're doing everything we can." The room where time stood still. The ICU felt like another world. As Gabriel stepped inside, he was met with cold, fluorescent light and the rhythmic beeping of machines. The sterile air smelled of antiseptic and desperation. The sound of Jimmy's ventilator filled the room, mechanical and impersonal, replacing the thunderous voice that had once stirred the souls of millions. Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. His father looked almost unrecognizable. Pale. Still. Lifeless. Tubes protruded from his arms, machines tracked every heartbeat, every breath. It was a jarring sight, this man who had once marched confidently across revival stages now laid out, silent and frail. Gabriel reached out and gently grasped his father's hand. The warmth was gone. The firmness, the weight of reassurance, was replaced by a chilling stillness. "Dad, I'm here," he whispered, his voice cracking under the pressure of unspoken fears. He pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, speaking softly. He wasn't sure if Jimmy could hear him, but it didn't matter. He needed to talk. Needed to fill the room with something other than silence. He recounted stories from his childhood, times they'd gone fishing, the nights they'd sat on the porch discussing faith, purpose, and calling. He spoke about his children, about the congregation at Family Worship Center, about the thousands of people praying. One nurse, a kind woman with gentle eyes, paused as she adjusted the four. "They can hear more than you realize," she said quietly. "Keep talking. It matters." And so Gabriel talked. When he ran out of words, he sang. It was an old hymn, one his father had often sung in the early days of his ministry. The words were familiar, but the meaning now felt deeper, heavier. His voice wavered with emotion. Then, mid-verse, he noticed it, a twitch. A small movement in his father's fingers. The monitor registered a slight uptick. The nurse looked up and gave him a hopeful nod. "Keep singing," she said. Memories, letters, and the longest days. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Gabriel didn't leave the hospital. He slept in short spurts on a stiff chair, fueled by coffee, prayer, and sheer will. He read scripture aloud to his father, quoted his favorite passages, and played recordings of their shared sermons, hoping the sound of familiarity would anchor Jimmy's spirit. The updates from doctors were careful, clinical, "He's stable, but it's still critical." Hope came in small doses, a slight improvement in breathing, a shift in blood pressure. Every flicker on the monitor became a reason to hold on. But it was a fragile hope, always shadowed by uncertainty. In the stillness, Gabriel began to write. He took out his journal and poured out everything he had never said. He wrote a letter to his father, part confession, part tribute, part farewell. He thanked him for his guidance, acknowledged the weight of the legacy he carried, asked for forgiveness for past misunderstandings, and offered his own forgiveness in return. He wrote about the lessons learned in silence, about a love that ran deeper than even he had understood. On the third day, he read the letter aloud. Each word trembled with meaning. "No matter what happens," he said near the end, "I'm proud to be your son." He leaned in, kissed his father's forehead, and whispered. That evening, Gabriel walked outside into the fading light and sat on a bench just beyond the hospital entrance. He pulled out his phone and recorded a video. His face was pale and weary, but his voice, though quiet, carried the weight of sincerity. "Life is fragile," he began. "One moment you're planning your next sermon, and the next, you're praying for just one more day." His eyes welled with tears. Faith isn't about certainty. It's about trust when you have none. The video was raw, heartfelt, and unfiltered, and it resonated across the world. Messages from strangers poured in, parents, pastors, nurses, believers, and even skeptics, sharing how his honesty had given them comfort in their own dark hours. The chapel and the whisper of faith. Sometime during the fourth night, when the hospital halls were at their quietest and even the machines seemed subdued, Gabriel slipped away to the small chapel tucked behind the ICU. It was dimly lit, with wooden pews and a flickering candle by the altar. He sat alone in the back row, head bowed, hands clasped. "I'm not a preacher right now," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm just a son. And I don't know what to pray for anymore." His words were not eloquent. They were not rehearsed. They were broken, aching fragments of a heart struggling to believe in the face of despair. But he remembered something Jimmy had once told him: sometimes the loudest faith is the one that simply says, "I'm still here." That night, something shifted, not in Jimmy's condition, but in Gabriel's soul. He realized that faith wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to love, to remain, to hope, even in the fear. He returned to the ICU not with answers, but with presence. A nurse later leaned over and said, "Maybe he's still fighting because you're here." And Gabriel believed that. He believed in the power of love, quiet, loyal, constant, to sustain life when nothing else could. The video that touched the world. On the fifth day, with the weight of grief pressing into his shoulders and the hospital walls closing in, Gabriel stepped outside again. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of summer grass and nearby pine. He sat beneath a tree and began to speak into his phone's camera. This time, there was no plan. Just a soul unraveling in real time. "You think you're strong," he said, "until you're the one sitting in silence, holding someone's hand, hoping for them to come back to you." He spoke of the moments in the ICU, the fear, the waiting, the small flickers of hope. "I've preached faith my whole life," he continued, "but nothing prepares you for the moment you have to live it." He looked directly into the lens. "If you're going through something like this, if someone you love is hurting, please know you're not alone. The waiting room, the hospital bed, the whispered prayers, they matter. Love matters. Presence matters. The video spread like wildfire. Not because it was dramatic or newsworthy, but because it was true. It was real. It was what people needed to hear. A reminder that strength is sometimes just not leaving. That love, when all else fails, is enough. Conclusion: the faith that holds on. In the quiet hum of the ICU, surrounded by blinking machines and whispered prayers, Gabriel Swaggart discovered a new kind of faith, one not rooted in certainty, but in surrender. He entered that hospital as a son searching for answers, desperate for healing. But what he found instead was something deeper, something holy. He found the faith that holds on, not in triumph, but in the ache of the unknown. Jimmy Swaggart's legacy is immense. For decades, he preached revival, hope, redemption. He led multitudes to believe in grace. But in these silent hours, it was not his sermons echoing through the room, it was his spirit. That same fire that once stood behind pulpits now burned quietly in his son, who kept vigil not with words of power but with tears, songs, scripture, and presence. And through that presence, Gabriel became a living testimony to everything his father stood for. This was not a story of a miraculous recovery, at least, not in the traditional sense. It was not marked by the triumphant beating of odds or a dramatic moment of healing caught on camera. Instead, it was marked by stillness, by faithfulness, and by a love so steady that it refused to leave the room, even when hope flickered. In the ICU, Gabriel didn't just pray for his father, he became the prayer. His voice, his presence, his endurance, these were the offerings he laid at the altar of the unknown. Faith, he came to realize, isn't always the roar on the mountaintop. Sometimes it's the whisper in the valley, the quiet, persistent belief that love still matters, even if nothing changes. It's the decision to stay. To hold a hand. To sing a hymn through tears. And so, as the world watched and waited, Gabriel stood firm. He showed us that miracles are not always measured in awakenings, but in the unwavering courage to wait, to love, and to trust. Whatever happens in the days to come, the message remains: faith is not just what we preach when the lights are bright. It's what we live in the darkest hours. Jimmy Swaggart's most enduring sermon may never be spoken. It may be this: the son who stayed, the faith that held on, and the love that never left the room.